Hello whisky fans. Whyte Mackay. Sorry for offending your eyeballs with the sight of this one. My excuse is that I was given a half bottle of this by my dad, who didn't want it anymore, so I agreed to dispose of it. So yeah, thanks Dad, you shouldn't have. No really, you shouldn't have. Please stop buying this. Whyte Mackay is owned by the Whyte Mackay Group. It's the company that owns Jura, Fetterken, all of those. And it's kind of Richard Patterson's cash cow, isn't it, the Whyte Mackay blend? Made by the Whyte Mackay Company. I haven't checked, but I'd imagine that this is probably their biggest seller by a very long way. You can see it literally everywhere here in the UK. It's in all the supermarkets, every corner shop, and a lot of the lower end pubs will have this behind the bar as a rebranded variation of this. It's kind of the house double. It's very, very popular. It's very cheap. You can often get it on discount at a very good price in litre bottles. It's very popular as a cheap mixer, possibly for good reason, which we will come to. Being a blended Scotch whisky, we know that there's going to be at least one single malt and at least one grain whisky in this. And considering that Whyte Mackay also own the Invergordon grain distillery, the second largest component in this stuff by volume is almost certainly going to be Invergordon grain. I don't think it's going to be a surprise or a spoiler for anyone that, having tasted this, I think that this is a very, very grain-heavy blended Scotch. I don't think that there's a high content of single malt in this at all. So obviously being a 40% ABV product, 60% of every bottle of this is going to be water, and I would guess that probably an extra 30% is probably going to be that Invergordon grain whisky. We've probably also got a bit of Tamnavulin in this. It's owned by the same company, and I've said before, a bit controversial, but I like Tamnavulin. Tamnavulin, I think, is a distillery that's got massive untapped potential. Potentially also a little bit of Jura gone into this too, and maybe some Fetterken and some Dalmore, although those last two probably very, very little, if any at all, because Whyte Mackay are kind of positioning those distilleries as their more premium brands these days. Details on the label of this one. It looks like Tizer. It's almost certainly 3 years old. I don't think that this is any older or more expensively produced than it absolutely has to be. Without a doubt, it is artificially coloured to hell, and it is chill filtered because it's very clear, very easy to see through. Apparently it has a gold medal from the International Spirits Challenge 2018. Take from that what you will. Anyone that's familiar with Whyte Mackay might have seen the words triple matured on here, and a lot of people kind of confuse that with triple distilled. It's not triple distilled. It's grain whisky that goes through a column still, so that's been technically distilled probably hundreds of times, and single malt, which is almost certainly double distilled. The triple maturation that they refer to, it's actually detailed on the back, but it's basically that they mature the malt whiskies and the grain whiskies probably for 3 years in whatever casks, almost certainly refill bourbon casks. The second maturation is that both halves, the malt and the grain, both have a sherry finish. And the third step of the triple maturation is that once they've sherry finished both halves and blended them together and come up with a flavour profile that they're happy with, they actually put it, and I quite like this, I wish more companies did this, they put the finished blended product back into the casks to marry, to settle down, to oxidise a little bit, and just sort of smooth and round out. And in my opinion, I think this goes a hell of a long way to combating things like bottle shock and making it so you don't have to spend as long airing out a whiskey before it's ready to drink. I think that the distilleries that do this marrying process, just allowing the vatted components to settle and integrate properly, you generally end up with a whiskey which is closer to at its best as soon as you open it. In theory anyway, that's how it works for good distilleries and good whiskey. On the other hand, let's get this Whyte Mackay in the glass. Whyte Mackay. Let's see what it's like. screw top, obviously, as you'd expect. I can't remember how much my dad paid for this, but this is a litre bottle, and you can probably get this for well under £20. So it's one of the cheapest whiskies that you can buy that's not a supermarket's own horrible 40% white label thing. Cheers. On the nose, as I said, very, very grainy, very grain forward. It presents itself a lot like an actual grain whiskey. There's really not a lot of maltiness going on in this one. Quite grainy and cardboardy. There is a little bit of sherry in there, a little bit of evidence of that sherry finish that they suggested. Quite bitter though. Perhaps a little bit of a chocolatey note, which is potentially coming through from that sherry. Sort of bitter, toasted grains. A little bit of a raw ethanol note in this one, so really raw and literally spirity, just kind of like unmatured new make. There is, to be fair, it's got a bit of character. There is a little touch of dirty, funky smoke on the nose of this one. But really, it is very harsh on the nose, quite immature, and a very, very harsh aroma. Actually enough to make me, when I first started nosing and tasting this, to make me check the ABV on this one. I would say that this is probably the harshest nose I've ever had on a whiskey that's still 40% ABV. Normally when I get a whiskey that's this aggressive on the nose, it's because it's high strength. This stuff isn't, it's 40%, but it still grabs your nostrils. And just, it's got a real prickly punch to it, which is really surprising for something that is minimum strength. So let's see how it tastes. I'm sure it's probably safe to drink. Very weak on the arrival. The early flavours on the palate, you're really not getting a lot at all. Quite raw, watery, very weak, not many flavours on the very early sips. A little bit of a cardboardy grain whiskey note, young grain whiskey, becoming a little bit rougher and more harsh later on. A little bit of a metallic and bitter note, perhaps suggesting a little bit of a rush distillation and a short maturation, probably in fairly dead inactive casks. Very simple on the palate. Rough, spirity, immature, perhaps a tiny bit of vanilla, a little bit of coconut grain whiskey note, but very rough. Actually makes you think it must be quite hard to make a whiskey both this rough and weak at the same time. It's really not something that you find all that often. As for the finish on this one, very short, very light, not unpleasant, but it's really over very, very quickly. So all in all, it's very cheap, it's a bit rough, it's very young, it's not impossible to enjoy. I think if you get a good bottle of this, if you get a good bottle from a good batch, but in my opinion, I've tried whiskey from various batches of Whyte Mackay over the years, and I think that it's one of the worst offenders when it comes to quite large batch variation, and not batch variation in a good way. And to be honest, when I say if you get a good bottle from a good batch, good is really not that good, and bad is really quite bad. I don't think that anyone should be under the impression that this is something that you can compare to, or think of this as competition to single malts. It's really very obviously a very economical production. Normally, with probably every other review that you've seen of mine, I have a habit, and I think it's justified, of criticising anything that comes in as a low ABV. And this stuff, being 40% ABV, I'm inclined to say is possibly a good thing, because I'm not entirely sure if I would survive this stuff at 46 or 50%. This stuff at cask strength is the kind of thing that would either kill or cure. Sad to say, it probably is a good candidate for the worst whiskey I've ever reviewed on here. and I'm really not trying to be edgy for internet points. I always make a point of looking for the good points of any whiskey that I try, and most whiskies have some redeeming features. They have something that you can enjoy about them. But this stuff, especially if you get a bad batch, it's really, really difficult. I would say that this Whyte Mackay blend, it's probably even slightly worse than Famous Grouse, which I'm really not a fan of. Probably slightly worse than Lidl's Queen Margot. Possibly even slightly worse, tiny bit worse than Haig Clubman. Comparing this to like the main competition for Whyte Mackay in the UK supermarkets, which, if we were honest, is where most of this gets sold. It's sold to people that don't really care about the flavour. They probably intend to consume it entirely in mixers, or at least with a hell of a lot of ice, and they don't really want to taste it. But comparing this to the main competitors for Whyte Mackay, you've got whiskey blended Scotch like Bell's and Grant's. They're probably going to be the closest competition. And I think that this here, it probably has a little more sherry and a little bit more smoke than your Bell's and your Grant's, but it's a hell of a lot more rough and a lot more immature. I'd say that, if anything, this is going to be closest to your Famous Grouse, the standard 40% Famous Grouse, which, if you've seen my review that I did quite a few years ago now, you'll know that I'm really not a fan of. So there's going to be some people out there that are watching this and getting angry and angrier, and they're firing up the keyboards to send me an angry message as I speak. And if you do like this, and obviously some people do because it sells in massive volumes, you don't necessarily need to send me an angry comment to say how wrong I am that this is bad, because everyone is subjective, and I know that budget whiskey is important and it has its place, but if you do like this and you're looking for something else, shall we say, I would really suggest trying perhaps one of the other Whyte Mackay products, something like a Tamnavulin double cask, which is a similar strength to this, similar presentation, and if you get the Tamnavulin on offer, it's only slightly more expensive than this stuff. But I think that Tamnavulin double cask, if you can get a bottle for £20 or maybe a bit less, it really shows you how much more single malt Scotch whisky has to offer. So if you are looking for something else, looking to branch out from the Whyte Mackay, get yourself a bottle of Tamnavulin double cask, stick it in the smallest glass you've got. You don't necessarily need one of these things, but any shot glass or a rocks glass, whatever you've got, just give it some time, let it heat up a little bit in your hand, give it a little sniff. You can swirl it around and sling it over your shoulder like Richard Patterson if you want to. But I would really recommend getting something like that and just giving it a chance in the glass, taking little sips and seeing what you find. Other good alternatives to this is probably a little bit more pricey, but the Naked Grouse, or I think they call it the Naked Malt now, is another very affordable dram with some really good sherry in it, better sherry than this, more sherry than this, and it's just a much better, much more well thought out, not well presented because it's still 40%, but a more enjoyable experience, I think. So yeah, Whyte Mackay, not for me. I will probably use the remainder of this in mixed drinks because it's still reasonably warm here in the UK, and why not? Very, very few whiskies are bad enough to tip down the drain. There's still value in this bottle, not a lot, but I'm not going to waste it. So I hope this has been an amusing little video for you. Let me know what you think of Whyte Mackay. I'm sure almost everyone has probably tried it. Do you think it's an acceptable, cheap whiskey for the price that it sells for? Are you a reformed Whyte Mackay drinker? There's got to be some of us out there. Let me know what you think, and thanks for watching. Cheers.